الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله
إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا وسيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له أشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى أحبابه وعلى آله أجمعين إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما كثيرا أما بعد My beloved brothers and sisters, alhamdulillah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed us with another blessed Friday, the best day of the week. And in this time, in the few minutes that we have together, we can turn the phones off, please. In the few minutes that we have together, I would like to give advice to myself first and to all of us as a community about some very, very important points that we as Muslims in the society that we are in, we have to operate. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Imran, He says, كنت خير أمة أخرجت للناس تأمرون بالمعروف وتنهون عن المنكر وتؤمنون بالله. Very important point in this ayah, in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states, you are the best nation produced for mankind. You enjoin what is right, forbid what is wrong, and believe in Allah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala here is commanding us that we must encourage what is good. And at the same time, we must forbid that which is evil. And in order for us to do this, Ibn Taymiyyah Shaykh al-Islam states 3 conditions must be met. One, the first and foremost, is that we have to have knowledge. Because how is it that we're going to encourage what is good and forbid what is evil when we don't have the knowledge? The second, he advised that we need to be gentle with how we use that knowledge. Meaning, we have to utilize it in a way that it allows people to listen to us. And finally, we have to follow that gentleness with patience. Why? Because we are not going to say something, we're not going to advise, and all of a sudden people are going to change their ways. So we have to be very patient. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that we don't have that responsibility upon us. We have some very, very important responsibility because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands it and says this is an obligation upon each one of us. And in the different hadith, the Prophet ﷺ stated, all of you have a responsibility to stop what is evil and encourage what is good. And he then gave a series of basically, if you cannot change it with your hand, change it with your mouth, etc., and so on. So once again, we have a certain responsibility that's been put upon us, and we have to take that responsibility very seriously. So, in particular, for today's khutbah, for the very short few minutes that we have together, I would like to use these verses in this hadith to point out something that's happening in our society that we're not necessarily blind to it because we all see it, but rather we fail or refuse to address it. And that's the component of the many different evils that are happening, and in particular, that's happening around our kids. We, inshallah, hope that our kids will grow up to be righteous Muslims that understand their deen, and we try to advise them, but how many of us are truly engaged with our children and what's happening around them? How many of us know that in New York City public schools today, not a law that's going to pass or something they're talking about today, there's something called transgender bathrooms, meaning that if a boy or a young lady identifies themselves as the opposite gender, they have to have a bathroom allocated. And furthermore, it could be that a child that says, I am a boy, but yet they are a girl, they cannot be prevented from being identified that way. So what does that mean in your child's school? Does that mean when your young lady is going to the bathroom, a young man may appear in that bathroom? How many of us here know how the school that their children go to have implemented this policy? Because that policy is in place now. How many of us are engaged in a conversation about what's going on in our curriculums with our students? Because what the conversation that's happening now is that potentially even every component, we're not talking about sex education anymore, by the way. We're talking about even in math class, where they're going to implement in our workbooks scenarios that open our students in ways that we have never seen before. Like, for example, John was talking to his boyfriend, and they were going to purchase something. And this is the math problem, that the conversation is happening now about actually being implemented in our public schools. How many of us actually knew that? And then, for those who knew it, what have we done about it? Have we started engaging our schools? Have we started talking to our principals? Have we started talking to our teachers? Where is that component? Because wallahi, we cannot expect our 5, our 7, our 10, our 15-year-old child to basically stand up and have a voice when we ourselves don't even know. We don't have the knowledge. But the reality is that there are some very hard conversations that are very difficult for parents to have with their own kids, but it's becoming completely normalized in our child's classrooms. How many of us are actually engaged in this? How many of us are engaged with what our children watch? I had a colleague that mentioned this to me maybe a couple of days ago, who their child, who's like something of the nature of 8 years old, comes up to them, wallahi, and he tells them, "Hey Dad, are you, what sexuality are you? Are you straight? Are you gay?" And he goes, "Well, I'm straight because I am married to your mother." And the conversation goes on, and he says, "Well, I think I'm bi." This is a 7 or 8 year old child. And he goes, "Well, what do you mean?" Because he wants to understand where does this come from? And he said, "Well, I like boys and I like girls." And he goes, "But there's a clear misunderstanding here of the terminology and how it's used." But these conversations are not happening. And I know it's like almost in our society we've created this taboo about having these conversations, but if you're not having them, be sure and certain they're happening. So you can either be part of the conversation, I can either be part of the conversation, or I can step aside and watch my child be brainwashed. Right? How many of us are engaged with how the curriculums are teaching the situation with Philistine? How many of us are engaged? Social studies class. How many of us are actually looking at the children's books and looking at how their teachers are presenting these information to our students? How many of us are doing this? How many of us are actually saying, I saw an article on Mozilla, which is an authentic piece of work that you can use in a classroom and is recognized by many educators. There are many articles about the grief of the Palestinians. How many of us have suggested or sent an article to one of the social studies teachers for their child saying, "Hey, considering all circumstances, I thought this article would be helpful"? How many of us are doing this? How many of us are aware that there was a teacher a principal in New York City that sent her staff a letter basically in support of Philistine? She sent a staff basically saying to provide support for our students. And this was a principal that looked like she was, in a neighborhood where there was a lot of Arab, a lot of Muslim students. And so she wanted to cater to the needs of the students that she works with. Which is, by the way, something in education that's consistently encouraged. That you work with your children, that as an educator, you have to see and meet the needs of the students that you're teaching. And after this, she got a very big backlash, even from the school chancellor, who went on to tweet that this was a very divisive message and that appropriate action will be taken against the school principal. How many of us are aware of this? So this is the principal that was standing up for our children, for standing up for our rights. And yet, we don't hear much about it, and even worse, we don't give any kind of support. So when people are having a conversation, the reason there was a backlash is because other people are engaged. Other people are like, no, we cannot have this happen. And so they start writing letters. They start contacting people. Why? To cause a hype, to make it seem that that the school and the people that are attending that school are actually leaning into one direction, where the reality is not the case. And I challenge you, think about the fact how, the LGBTQ community, how far they progressed over the past 20 years. I remember this. When I was a young kid, when someone said, someone acted a certain way, they would say, "Oh my God, you're this." And you were like, "Oh, you better get away." Now, it's completely popular. It's not only something that's, just normalized, it's actually popular with our students, with our children, with what they see in their schools. How many of us are engaged? I know for Khutbah we would like to hear about the different ahadith, about the different ayats in which we're doing good, etc. But this is it. This is the amal. This is the amal. This is where it actually shows that you actually put your wealth, you put yourself, your well-being, for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because we cannot expect that we are going to have righteous children. We're going to have our young people stand up and talk when we see their parents on the sidelines. Can't happen. Because they're going to get a backlash and they're not going to know how to respond. And we know the parents are not engaged. So we have to begin really understanding what is going on in our society. Because while people in Palestine, while people in Egypt, they all have their own causes. They all have their own fights. But we have our fight. You know what the problem is? We currently, as we stand, try to fight other people's fight and leave our fight. Because we say we have to support our brothers and sisters in Palestine. Great. Are you fighting it in the way that you're supposed to be doing it here? Or are we just loud voice when we come to the masjid and we know how to speak amongst our own people, but when we get out, we're silent, we're mute. Because we say there's no politics involved in our jobs. But yet, we find it everywhere around us. Because we have to be strategic. And again, as Ibn Taymiyyah said, that we have to first have the knowledge of what is it that's going on around us. Because if we're not taking actual steps to understand what's going on, we can't speak on something that we don't know. And you have to, as an individual, I as an individual have to take that effort. Yes, we can have community organizations or a panel discussion or something of that nature to help us get on that track. But it doesn't mean the responsibility is lifted off of me and you if the measure is not providing that, or the measure hasn't gotten to that, or maybe you need to be doing the push for the measure providing that information. But we have to take the time to do so. أقول ما تسمعون استغفر الله إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. الحمد لله الذي هدانا وما كنا له مهتدين. My beloved brothers, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states, وإذا قيل لهم اتبعوا ما أنزل الله قالوا بل نتبع ما ألفينا عليه آباءنا أو لو كان آباءهم لا يعقلون شيئا ولا يهتدون. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states, follow from what Allah has revealed. They will say, we follow our fathers. We follow our fathers. Even though their fathers were void of wisdom and guidance. And their reasoning is just that our forefathers used to do this. Brothers and sisters, we cannot have our children say that my father is a Muslim. Can't do it. We can't say the religion that we practice is this, but here's what I think. Because that happens very often, and even from us adults. Right? We always almost separate our religion, the concept of separation of church and state. Right? Here's what my religion believes, and here's where I stand. That's a problem. And the problem here is that, wallahi, those aggressors see this as an opportunity. Because they say, oh, alhamdulillah, for them, they separated themselves from what their religious beliefs are. We have to stop doing this. Because we think that by sacrificing components of our deen, the people will be more likely to lean towards us. But the realities are, the more we separate from our deen, the more they believe that they can get us to come towards the other side. That's our reality. And if we're not paying attention, if we're not taking note and planning, because be sure those who are planning against us are planning and planning day and night. We have to start taking actual steps as a community, but in order for us to take steps as a community, we have to take steps as individuals. We cannot say as a community, yeah, I'll be there. But what are you doing as an individual? Because parents have a voice. They absolutely have a voice. Just like some parents are complaining, or certain advocacy groups say, we command that our children be recognized based on the gender they recognize. You can go and say, I demand to ensure that there's no young man walking into the same bathroom as my daughter. But are we doing that? So we have to take actual steps. Let's stop slacking, because we've seen over time, things are just getting worse. In terms of how liberal our society has become, and how conservatism is looked in a way, and I'm not talking about conservatism as a political party, I'm talking about religious conservatism, is really being underlined, and it's being diminished. So we have to take actual steps, or we will not have a country that we can freely practice our deen, because your deen will simply be practice your deen in your masjid. All of us have at some point immigrated, or most of us have immigrated from another country, or our families have, for the reason, hopefully, to come here for a better life, the opportunity to practice our deen more freely. But we're not taking advantage of this. We have to start taking steps to making sure that we are having those hard conversations. It's okay to have these conversations. The Prophet ﷺ never shied away from a question. So how come when it comes to us, we think that being pious and being religious means I can't have a hard conversation? It doesn't make any sense. That's not from the deen. Even, I'm sure some of our brothers sitting here right now are feeling a little iffy and sweating a little bit about how I'm having this conversation right now. But that's okay. It's okay to have that conversation. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give our children and our families our hidayah and steadfast to be able to push and ensure that we can practice our deen in a way that it was intended to be practiced. اللهم اهدنا واهد بنا واجعلنا سببا لمن اهتدى. ربنا اغفر لنا وارحمنا وانت خير الراحمين. اللهم انا نسالك برحمتك التي وسعت كل شيء ان تغفر لنا. اللهم اغفر لنا وارحمنا. اللهم اغفر لنا وارحمنا. اللهم انصر اخواننا في فلسطين. اللهم انصر اخواننا في فلسطين. اللهم انصر اخواننا في فلسطين. اقول ما تسمعون واقيموا الصلاه.
الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله
الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله قل أعوذ برب الناس ملك الناس إله الناس من شر الوسواس الخناس الذي يوسوس في صدور الناس من الجنة والناس. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله